Hello and welcome back to our CANversation series for people with a can-do mindset. I'm Cam Chauhan, the Executive Director here at ECIS, and I'm so excited today to honour these two trailblazers who join us. I greatly admire all that I learned from their wealth of knowledge and experience. I'm going to read their bios so that I don't miss anything out that's really important. So just bear with me for a moment. So I'm going to introduce my colleagues from the International Schools Anti-Discrimination Taskforce. Firstly, Dr. Michele Rice. She serves as the Head of Diversity, Equity and Inclusion at the IB. In this role, she provides the strategic vision and guidance that promotes DEIJ practices and leads to the development of the necessary tools and processes to guide this work for all IB departments. She's also the first person in this job. It's an inaugural role. Michele also works with the IB schools to support them in their DEI work. She holds a PhD in comparative sociology and has served as an educator for 28 years. She clearly started very, very young, teaching in multiple disciplines as an undergraduate professor and as a university professor of sociology and conflict resolution. In her former tenure as an academic, Dr. Rice has served also as a department chair at Nova South and Eastern University's doctoral and graduate programs in conflict resolution studies. She's also served as a consultant in training, community development, and workshop facilitation. We also have with us Fidelis Nthenge, who's become a dear friend and a colleague. She's an inspiring and visionary leader in education, a field that she's also worked in for more than 25 years. She's the proven ability to partner with schools and engage with communities to provide guidance and support in school development and innovation. She has an unwavering commitment to influencing the capacity of others to bring out the best in them and for achieving organisational goals, something she sees as a great strength and a superpower as a woman leader. Fidelis is a passionate advocate for social justice and is committed to inclusion through diversity, equity and belonging. Recently, Fidelis became the Director of Curriculum Development. Many congratulations. And with that, Fidelis, I'd like to start with you. So I've given a little bio, but what I'd really like for you to share with everybody is your journey to where you are now and a little bit about your background as well.
Thank you, Pam. And welcome. I'm really, really happy to be having this conversation with people who are in this space with us together. And I just want to begin briefly from my younger years, when I was about 16 years of age. It kind of dawned to me that my pathway was going to be working with young people, because I realized that was kind of my just cause. But anyway, whoever knows that the career they will end up in at the age of 16. So, but somehow my pathway evolved into being an educational leader and working in the field of education, as well as being a mother of 5 children. And I've grown through different levels in educational leadership, starting from the schools when I was head of school, and going through different levels and different types of challenges, especially in the field of international education, where we know that it's not always been very easy for women of color actually to take leadership positions and to be seen as people driving or people needed to drive the change and humanize the work that happens in schools. And in 2011, I joined the International Baccalaureate Organization from being a head of school in some of the Aga Khan schools in East Africa. I've been working for the International Baccalaureate for the last 11.5 years. And I recently became the Director of Curriculum Development. So my work really has been instrumental in the IB as well as in my own family, because I have had a journey and a story to live and tell with my children who have been amazing in helping me learn and grow and appreciate different perspectives, and just having that humility to be as much as a learner as the children we have in our classrooms. So that's really my background. And professionally, as Cam said, I'm a visionary, collaborative, and a woman of high integrity. I like to co-create the vision in the places where I work and build together a roadmap with those I work with so that we can realize the vision. And I am committed to the highest levels of integrity, because I also expect the same of those whom I work with. And outside work, 3 words to describe myself: I'm a committed family person, a mother who holds myself to the highest levels of expectation to model what I would expect from my 5 children. And I love to work with people that are committed to social justice. Thank you, Cam.
It's lovely to have you here, and thank you for sharing that and sharing your background. Hello, Michele.
Hello.
Please do start by telling us some about your previous work and the path that you had that led you to this inaugural role at the IB, because it must have been a bit daunting to come in as the first person that was going to do this job in such a huge organization.
Well, thank you for having me here. And it's such an honor to really be able to share with you the journey that has led me to the IB. As you mentioned, I've had 28 years of experience working as an educator, particularly in higher education, in colleges and universities as a professor. And I started out very early on in the field of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I remember my early years back when I was an undergraduate student at Florida International University. I was working with teams on conferences around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And at the time, they were focusing on social justice issues. And my role was to help to pull together these festivals and these conferences around these topics, and to bring people from the community to engage. And not only that, but also bring schools and school children to hear from mentors around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so I had a very early start with that, but that also informed the course that I took in terms of my doctoral studies. I pursued a degree in sociology, comparative sociology, which involved cultural analysis, and also looking at race and ethnicity within the US context. And that really helped to catapult my work in terms of the consulting that was being done in communities as well. So I had 2 tracks in my career, or 3 tracks, I should say. I was a professor. I became an administrator in higher education, running a graduate and doctoral program. And all the while, I would be consulting with community organizations around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and also conflict resolution practice. And one of the most cherished memories are the research and practice work that I did with schools around mentoring children, school children from primary to middle to high schools, high schoolers, and empowering those students to be able to achieve self-efficacy through our programs. And so that really gave me that early start in the field. And so as in my current role as the head of diversity, equity, and inclusion at DIB, I provide the strategic vision and guidance around DEI planning and implementation. It's really been wonderful to join DIB and work with people who really kind of they believe in this idea of international mindedness, and it's been ubiquitous in the culture. And when you go to schools, and I've met with school administrators and teachers, their enthusiasm and their passion for the IB curriculum and what it stands for has been infectious. And it's really made me see the importance of what we're doing. And so I am really thrilled to be able to just continue to build on the work that has been happening at the IB around access and inclusion, there's been a lot of work done on this, and whenever I speak to schools, they're very passionate about it, and they laud the work that the IB has been doing around supporting students and their needs around learning.
Mhm.
And so I want to continue to build upon that. And I also want to continue to develop new areas of inquiry and practice at the IB around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so my work has been to provide strategic guidance internally in terms of program development and implementation, and so that we can support our staff, and so that the ideas around diversity, equity, and inclusion are ubiquitous, and that they're equipped with the tools to serve the schools. We serve our school communities, and for me, that's really important because we want to make sure that our students, our teachers, and the principals, the heads of schools, and the parents, that they feel that they're valued and heard. And so that's been the guiding idea around the work that I want to undertake with regards to the IB. And in terms of my own personal life, my husband and I have two wonderful daughters. They're grown children in their mid-20s to and 30s, believe it or not. Yes. And my husband and I worked on a lot of consulting together. So we collaborate a lot around consulting. We had for years. And so a lot of the work that we have been doing has been around inclusive community building. Wherever we do projects, we have done projects, it's been around this for not just school communities, but for organizations at large who are interested in building inclusion. And so that work also had informed my practice at DIB. I'm very excited to work with our IB staff. I'm also very excited to work with IB World Schools, and I'm also very excited to work with our community partners such as ECIS and with UCAM.
Yeah, no, it's a mutual feeling. What I find really interesting, and when I read some of the work that you've done, a lot of this work is quite new to many people, and it happened after the George Floyd, tragedy. But clearly, you've been in this work for 20 years. So you must have seen a real change over those 20 years. And, when we talked earlier, you said, the evidence of that change is some of the groundswell you're seeing. So tell me just a little bit about what difference you see, because you've been doing this work for 20 years. And I only know two of you that have been doing this work for so long. So tell me a little bit about that journey of what you were doing and what changes you see.
Sure. So in terms of the major change that I see, back in the 1990s, the early 1990s, when I was facilitating conferences and workshops, people were talking, and I want to say that this is within the context of the United States. The big issues were around social justice and some of the social divisions around race and ethnicity. We were also talking about gender issues and gender equity, but in terms of the importance of some of those topics, they've continued within the United States, but we've also seen a domino effect where people around the world have been starting to pay attention, particularly these past couple of years, and particularly with the murder of George Floyd. So now there's a heightened attention, not just in the United States, but in other parts of the world around these topics and social justice and equity and access and inclusion. And so, but what I've seen that's been a real interesting change is that there's more awareness around the LGBTQIA+ issues, and that's really important. And there's more awareness around the need to make everyone within school context to feel comfortable, included, seen, and heard. And so that's been a wonderful development. And I think these past few years, what I've seen is that people are looking more at other aspects of diversity, people with disabilities, and as I mentioned, LGBTQIA+, and it's not just limited to looking at the traditional gender and racial or ethnicity issues. Within the IB, since the time that I started, what I've seen is this enthusiasm. It's very infectious because the people from various departments are constantly, contacting me so that I could support some kind of research study that they're doing and how they could infuse some DEI concepts in that. If they're doing program development, they're contacting me and getting some input in terms of how they can infuse DEI in that. And so there are a lot of different projects being undertaken by various departments, whether it's professional development, research design, curriculum design, etc., where it's really, I see that there's a groundswell of support around the IB for that.
No, that's wonderful. And I think you're right. It's much more of a global approach. And we have the wonderful Emily Meadows with us that's doing some real leading work with LGBTQG. And I've heard of so many schools that really couldn't grasp the concept. And then Emily goes in and like magic, they all really change how they feel, opposed to thinking, oh, it's a bit of a trend. They really get to grasp with it. So we honor your work, Emily, and everything that you're doing. Fidelis, I know that Michele arrived about a year ago now. Was it the 1st of April, your anniversary, isn't it, Michele, at the IB? But I know you've been on this path for a while. So prior to Michele arriving, what sort of things were you putting in place? Because I know you were already doing this work.
Thank you, Kamya. And the IB itself it's a huge organization. If you look at the number of schools that take on IB programs, and if you look at the number of educators, the IB Educator Network, that work or volunteer to do a lot of work for the IB. But if you look at the IB in terms of the number of employees who directly work for the organization, we are not that huge of an organization, because
really
we have roughly about between 800 and 1,000 people, employees directly working for the organization. So that's not as big as the footprint where we are: students, teachers, school leaders. And therefore, with my previous work, where I was really school facing, partnering mainly with school leaders and with coordinators, and together with my team supporting schools through implementation of an IB education, found ourselves having to engage in discussions around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And for years, international schools especially have been called out as the schools where they need to be taking the lead in this phase, but where this has not been done so well. And therefore, implicitly, the IB was being called out because these are international schools who implement an IB education. And following the atrocious death of George Floyd in 2020, the then Director General asked me to lead listening sessions within the organization and opened up listening sessions for the employees as an inward look and reflection on where we were as an organization in this space. Not just our schools, but even us as an organization, because we have to be seen to be leading as well. And it was, I have to say, it was a lot that came out from the listening sessions. And together with my colleagues, we were able to put together a report that went to the executive team of the IB. And I think even the executive team must have thought, hey, we need to be doing much more than we are doing from the report. And from that, then came the creation of the department that Michele heads today, the Department for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And I have to say, the groundwork was laid by not just myself, but the rest of the colleagues in the organization and the IB ecosystem that we work with, because these are schools, these are IB educators who have been calling upon the IB to take a lead in this space. And you know what, even from the initial small steps that the organization is making, I see the change that is happening within the organization. Just the terminology that is used in meetings and discussions, just how departments actually now are aware that we need to be looking at our work with a lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we have even gone ahead and done a bit of reorganization and restructuring. And especially in the division that I head now, as I said, I'm a director of curriculum development. The education office has gone through some reorganization to ensure that we have this space and these discussions are happening, because we've got to be seen to be taking a lead here.
Because the curriculum development is a piece that everyone's talking about at the moment. But as we've discussed offline, it's a piece that's going to take a while to change, isn't it? And also because you're in so many countries, it's the context. And actually what we've all realized with this work as well, it's the context of the countries you're in sometimes as well. I was talking to, schools in the Middle East and India, and even their contexts are very different on how this work can be delivered.
Absolutely, and I hope that we will get to a level where our IB curriculum that we design is so flexible and adaptable that schools implementing an IB education actually can humanize the pedagogies that they're using, so that teachers and students engaging with our programs actually have different ways of knowing and have different stories attached to the knowledge that they have. It's not one particular story and it's not one particular version.
Yeah, no, I think that's very important. Michele, we were going to talk about your first year as well. If you can give us a little whistle-stop tour of where you started and where you think you're at now, and what the next steps are perhaps as well in this incredible work that you're doing.
Well, thank you for that. And I'm really amazed and impressed by the work that Fidelis has been doing, first within this school's office, and then with regards to the education office. And I have to say that I'm grateful to her and to all those who participated in the listening session, because the things that they were able to suggest to the executive team brought to fruition my position and the work that I'm doing now. And so I'm very grateful for that. And I have to say that she has been collaborating with me from the very start and has been so supportive, and it's been truly encouraging. And part of the initiatives that I've been working on and collaborating with different departments within the IB has been with Fidelis and her teams around DEI projects. But to start, I want to say that we launched the DEI statements and commitments last year in July. And in so doing, we were able to share them with schools, with the IB community, and then started my work of doing some research and exploration around what we had been doing well at DIB when it comes to the issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion, particularly around access and inclusion. And as you know, we employ the universal design in terms of the work that's been done with schools. And so I learned a lot about those kinds of things through archival research, as well as doing my own listening sessions. I must have sat with at least 150 people within the IB to ask them what is front of mind for them when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And even though we were having these informal conversations, I gleaned a lot as a qualitative researcher. That's my thing. Like, I can sit and hear what people are saying and then kind of distill from that what are some of the key concepts that we can take away so that we can try to implement some programming around that. And
Did you have surprises in what you gleaned? Some of the things they were saying, were they surprises to you?
Well, they were new to me because I was new to DIB. And so I was really impressed by the enthusiasm that they showed for DIB and the culture around international mindedness and inclusion, and wanting students to be peacemakers once they get out of the IB programs. And to me, that was really wonderful. However, I also knew from the conversations that there were areas that we needed to grow, particularly around diversity and inclusion issues. There's more work that needed to be done. And so last year, based upon my findings, my listening sessions, based upon the work that Fidelis and her team had done with regards to the listening sessions, I compiled a list of recommendations for the executive team and in terms of how we could proceed to develop a DEI plan within the IB and to support the work that we're doing in IB World Schools. They were approving of these plans, and that set me on the course of developing programs and looking at ways to develop ways to implement some of these ideas. So in terms of key things that we've been working on staff training and development for all of the IB staff, and those have been launched already, and the staff are starting to take training around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the idea around that is that as we have a basic vocabulary around what these concepts are, that can better inform some of the planning that's already been going on in terms of access and inclusion, and in terms of policy changes, in terms of how we're supporting schools around their own DEI efforts. And so that's going on. We've collaborated with a number of organizations, including ECIS on the International Schools Anti-Discrimination Taskforce, and that's been a wonderful collaboration, and I'm sure you're going to speak more about that. Another initiative that's been happening is the Festival of Hope, which has been led by our Director General, Olli-Pekka Heinonen. And for me, it is a really wonderful show of diversity and inclusion because he engages students in dialogue, and he also engages educators, principals, as well as people who've been working in the field, as well as teachers, around what is important to them and what is meaningful to them in building inclusive communities and taking action. And also what do they find that is meaningful to them in terms of providing hope for them. And those are really encouraging conversations, and invariably these conversations lead to discussions around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that is something that we're all very proud of, and that actually has been helping to inform some of the policy reviews around DEI within the IB, and also in terms of what we do with schools.
Yeah, I love that Festival of Hope, because what it makes me think of is anything that's built for us without us isn't really for us. Mm-hmm. So to have that student voice, you can't build things for others unless they're at the table with us. The other thing you talked about right at the beginning of that, Michele, you talked about the commitments and the vision and the mission that you've helped put in place. We're having a conference in a few weeks about culture. And we always, when I visit schools, some schools in their culture, you can feel their vision, their mission, their commitment. If I asked one of the little kids, they would know what it is. The dinner lady would, everyone knows. And then there's schools where it's a really great statement, but nobody really knows how it impacts them on a daily basis. So that statement you've put together, the commitments, do you see evidence of it where you are? And can you see evidence of that change happening? I know you've only been in the role a year, but what evidence are you seeing of the change? Both of you, question to both of you.
So yes, I do see evidence of it from the time that I started to now. Mm-hmm. I'll speak particularly within the IB, and then I'll speak to the world schools and our engagement with schools. Within the IB, we already have, for instance, staff who've engaged in volunteer work around DEI, particularly to employee resource groups. They've formed employee resource groups along with me, and from various areas, so that they can work on projects around diversity, equity, and inclusion. We have a DEI council, advisory council, which is big, which is our inaugural DEI advisory council, and it's comprised of 31 staff from all 5 global regions. So, from the DC area to Europe to Singapore, we have staff who populate this DEI advisory council and who bring to the council ideas and projects that we can work on. And some of those are implemented or worked on through the subcommittees that I mentioned to you and the employee resource groups. So to me, that's like something that's happening at the IB. There's a lot of enthusiasm that wasn't there before. In terms of IB World Schools, an example of some of the changes that I'm seeing is that people walk up to me when we go to conferences and they say, oh, this is so needed, and we really wanted to get more information about this. And we have DEI breakout sessions in each of the conferences, at least that I've been a part of since I started. And we invite schools to be on panels to discuss what are their own best practices around DEI, what are their challenges, what are opportunities, and how can we best support some of their efforts. And primarily, we want to listen because we know that we have a lot of schools who had been doing work around DEI. They've created their own DEI statements. They've created policies and procedures that they're implementing. And so we use those opportunities as what the school's office calls these learning hubs, to be able to get schools to share their best practices for us to learn from that, and also for us to work internally to see how we can support the work that they're doing. So for me, those are kind of like evidences that the work is progressing.
Yeah, that there's change happening and people are committed to this change. And we talk about that all the time, moving from a place of compliance to commitment with this change. We don't want people thinking, you know, we've had 3 consultants in, we've got the policies in place and we can tick that one off. And that was one of the reasons that we, together with the IB, Ecolent, and Kevin Simpson and ALOC, established the Anti-Discrimination Taskforce. ECIs are also the founder members of the International Taskforce for Child Protection. So we felt that this work needed to continue and this journey needs to continue. And I think we all know that, and that's why we're here today. So thank you for sharing all of that. Fidelis, if you had to give, I know you were very school focusing till very recently. If you just had to give everyone something that they could do in their school quickly to bring some improvement or change or making things more, people more aware that you've done at the IB and you guys have done very successfully, could you share something?
Absolutely, Cam. And even before I share, I want to add something that I've already seen as a change in the IB in regards to diversity, equity, and inclusion. As an organization, I think previously we've done very well in the area of inclusive arrangements to assessment, inclusion in education, in the way schools can be inclusive in the classroom. But I don't think we had consciously looked deeply into our diversity practices, our equity practices, and it is diversity, equity in all aspects, as well as inclusion in terms of bringing the student voice into the fold in developing curriculum. We now have students as part of our curriculum development. We have students being involved with the Director General, as you've heard, with the Festival of Hope. And something else that I have seen as a change in curriculum development for the few months I've been there, we've moved away from a transactional way of talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we are in the process of creating that transformational change, embedding it in our culture, even in the way we design and develop curriculum. The number of voices we bring into the fold, the different perspectives that we want to bring into the fold. And I know we have a long way to go, but one of the things that we want to work on is even decolonizing our research methodologies in curriculum design and curriculum development. What kind of research methods are we using? Who are we partnering with? Are we really taking into perspectives of every other person? Because we need to see the students and the teachers engaging with our curriculum in a way that makes them feel that this is not just one Western perspective. If this perspective also takes into consideration my own cultural background, language, understanding, you know?
Yeah.
And sorry, I even forgot what had you asked me? Sorry.
It was about something that schools could do. And I think the thing you really said is consciously looking at your processes, not sort of having that group where we go, well, we've always done this and we tried that, but it doesn't work. And we've talked about this before. about bringing someone in and saying, why did you do that? Or how can we look at that recruitment differently? It's about that whole conscious piece.
Yeah.
So what we're going to do, we're going to, we can see most of you on screen. So I'm going to open up the floor so that you can ask questions. So please switch your camera on or put your hand up and we'll just bring you in. I've got Nancy here, who's a wonderful facilitator, and I'm just going to hope that she thinks that was the right thing to do. Yeah, we don't need to put in the chat box. There's enough of us here that we can speak to each other. So please do raise your hand or unmute yourself and say your question. Serenity, hello, how are you?
Hi guys, hi everyone. Thank you.
Lovely to see you, and thank you for joining us again today. It's lovely to see you on screen.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Michele and Fidelis, for this conversation, because it is refreshing to see and hear this conversation happening in the international space. I've been in the international space now for 3 years, and as a new international teacher coming from public schools, Title I's, into private school, I can see that there is a lot of work to do in ensuring students are included. I'm a learning support teacher, so I come from a special education lens. And it's very clear that international schools have a lot of work to do in that area, as well as DEI. And I believe that there is room for growth. But one of my questions is, what are some ways that schools and teachers maybe need to shift their mindset? What kinds of thinking do they have to make as a community in order to really understand that DEI is not just about one particular group or race that many people see it as, but it's actually all of us as people and our differences. So what kinds of ways of thinking would schools have to start shifting the mindset of their community to understand that DEI is all of us, and therefore it needs to be represented in curriculum? Great question.
I think I can check that. And of course, others are welcome to respond. Systemically, I think schools and school leadership will need to set the systems in place that allows for people to take accountability and to create the safe space for children and teachers and parents, the entire school community, to feel included, to feel safe, create that safe space where actually every voice is represented and everyone feels that they are part of that school community. And those systems can be created, but if they are left at the systems space, and then there are no stories tied to it, there is no relationship management to ensure that these discussions are happening, and there is no cultural shift to ensure the written and unwritten rules and regulations operating in the school actually embed this, then it will be left to only a certain few people. So it's everyone, it's the conversations, it is the safe space that we have created. It is the way we design our curriculum, because you may have a framework that you are following, but in the curriculum are our stories interwoven in that curriculum, even the way we deliver it. Do we see actually our community, our school community, mirrored in the way our school runs? Do we see our school community mirrored in our curriculum? As a teacher, if I go to the class, do I pick that one Ethiopian kid to represent the perception of Ethiopia? Or do I consciously know that I have quite a diverse classroom here, and it is not the responsibility of this one child or two children who come from this particular background who will represent this, but I'm educating myself as a teacher to be very conscious to ensure that this classroom is a very safe space for children to feel that they belong. And you know what? It will go nowhere if that particular head of diversity, equity, and inclusion, or even the coordinator, does not have the leadership. It starts with the leadership support as well. Yeah,
we've talked a lot about that, about having that positional power. Hello,
Right.
Rosa. I think Philip also had his hand up, but I don't know whether he disappeared. Philip, are you still here?
Yeah, I'm still here. I just dropped my hand because I'm actually in the car driving.
Okay.
And yeah, the question I want to ask is because I want to make a statement before I ask this question, and I'm using myself practically to ask this question because I've been within the IB for the past 5.5 years, working within IB schools only as a substitute teacher for 5.5 years in Switzerland. And it tends to be an issue of what I have noticed within the DEI situation in most of the IB World Schools that I've been serving in Switzerland is when there are these DEI conferences or workshops or whatever it is, it's just the same people sitting down discussing DEI, and I tend to find where is the diversity in the conversation. That is the same people migrating in the same place, discussing an issue that should be discussed by people from a broader perspective. Therefore, having the inclusion of the understanding from different races, different cultures, and different people sitting down to discuss these terms and these situations. And I find it quite intriguing that this is how it looks within the IB, within the space that I find myself. And I tend to question, is it just a window dress to make it seem or make believe that there is a DEI policy running, or there are really tangible policies that look within these establishments to ascertain if really DEI is being practiced within the IB World Schools? Because personally, to be in an institution for 5.5 years, not getting the employment in terms of recruitment, but still working within the IB for 5 years as a substitute, being a call-on teacher. And then in every year, you see tons of 20+ teachers coming in and everybody questioning, why are you not getting some of these roles that we are getting and you are serving when we are out of the classroom? It's kind of a little bit disturbing, and it tends to make it seem like everything around the IB, from my perspective, is a make-believe, and it's not. There are no tangible ways of really dealing with these diversity and recruitment issues that would really bring this issue to rest. We are in 2023, and we shouldn't be discussing issues of basic human rights like diversity.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Philip, for that question. It's a tough one. Where are you based, Philip?
I'm based in Switzerland.
Oh, you're in Switzerland, right?
Right. So I want to speak to that a little bit, Philip. So there's been, as I mentioned before, a groundswell of activity around this, particularly with our collaborations with the International Schools Anti-Discrimination Taskforce, and ECIS has led that task force, but we also have ECOLENT, which is an international school, and ILOC, and of course we've been part of that. And we've formed, 6 committees around governance, leadership, agency, recruitment, humanizing pedagogy, in order to address some of these same issues that you're talking about, Philip, and to really have groups that hone in and focus on what is happening in international schools or in IB schools. I would say generally, because a number of schools are IB schools, right? But in schools generally around these particular issues, around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and particularly in the recruitment. I'm a co-facilitator for the recruitment committee, along with Justin Garcia. And one of the things that we've been doing with our group is looking at the whole entire life cycle of human resources and how we can effectuate change and inform policies that could help support schools in terms of how they do targeted recruitments, and the staff that they bring to their schools that should represent the communities that they serve. And also, how do you retain staff? How do you train and develop them, mentor them, coach them, and also compensation. What does compensation look like in terms of the staff that you bring in? And so so this started last year. We would certainly want to ask for your patience. I know it might not seem like things are moving, but there is some activity around this, and hopefully some of the recommendations that come out of these committees, we can parlay that into guidances for schools, because schools have been asking for guidance around some of these issues. And hopefully then they could start implementing change within their own school context. So within your school, the international school that you're a part of, hopefully, as you've been through this particular webinar, you can actually share with them that there are things that are happening. Perhaps they can contact ECIS and the IB to learn about some of these initiatives, so that we can collaborate on ways to promote DEI within the school context as well.
Thank you, Michele. We're going to take one final question from Rosa, who had her hand up, and then we're going to go to the last part of what we're doing today.
Thank you, Pam. So I wanted to say more than a question. I wanted to share, of course, that concern with Serenity and Philippe as well. But at the same time, I just joined the IB as a curriculum manager after being an IB educator in different international contexts. And I can corroborate that work and enthusiasm that is being done right now within the IB to commit with that action that is so much needed. And to go back a little bit to Serenity's question, when she was asking, what do we need to shift that culture or that mindset? And definitely we need that representation, that diversity there, right? Because if it's only about changing, as Philippe, I think, was referring to, changing the mindset of those same people, right, who might seem that have always or are always there, that might be difficult. We need that experience with diversity. We need that diversity included, so that those difficult mindsets maybe can be changed or transformed or shifted, right? So without that exposure, it's going to be hard to change anything. So I do agree with that need, and at the same time, as an internal person from the IB who's just joined as a curriculum manager, I can say that my main priority was, how can I start working with that? And my first thing was, can I contact Dr. Rice and Fidelis to please start working on that? Because I do not see curriculum development separated to any issue that relates to DEIJ, because it should be going hand by hand. So yes, that was my comment more than a question. Thank you.
Rosa. Thank you so much. Finally, before we round up, we're going to talk about the radical dream. And when we thought about this, we thought about the radical dream at the IB for, Fidelis and for Michele and for all the other people. But actually, any radical dream we have, and the work that Sarah Kupke and I have been doing with quite a few schools, it should be in all parts of your life. The way we are and the changes we bring, it goes into every piece of our life. And I think we find that more and more. But can I ask you ladies to share what your radical dreams are, please? Fidelis, are you going to go first?
I'm very happy to go first. In fact, I actually wrote down my radical dream because I have been having it since I moved to a new office in the IB, since I moved to the education office. And my radical dream is that the IB curriculum frameworks or models that we design will be instrumental in humanizing pedagogy. And that's why we also need to decolonize our research methodologies in the IB as we do curriculum development. IB curriculum must lend itself to the flexibility and adaptability to provide for every teacher, every student, the agency to own their learning, to engage meaningfully with others, to live in harmony with the planet, and to flourish in life. But I am aware that this is going to be a long journey that I have to take with my team, which calls for being braver and more courageous.
Yeah. Thank you, Fidelis. And we look forward to watching your progress on that journey.
Thank you.
Michele.
My radical dream is to support the efforts at DIB, particularly from the Schools and Education Office, to do just what Fidelis is speaking to. I truly believe that a vision of building inclusive educational communities is aspirational, and it is a journey of continuous improvement. We're not always going to get it right. We're not always going to be perfect at it because we're always continually learning about each other and what makes us different, but also what is our common humanity. So for me, it's important to focus on creating cultures of belonging within not only the IB, but also in our IB World schools, where everyone, whether it's the students, the teachers, the administrators, the parents, the alumni, feel that they have a safe space, as Fidelis mentioned before, within those school communities, that they're seen, they're valued and respected, and that we never rest on our laurels to say, oh, we've done X, Y, Z, so we got it right, but that we continue to learn and grow. Yeah. So moving it forward, our efforts should continue to aim to provide schools with the necessary tools and resources to foster the diversity, equity, and inclusion that, as so many of you have said, is really important to making sure that this radical dream is achieved in terms of practice, in terms of what we do every day.
Thank you, Michele. For me as a peace activist, mine's very simple. I want access to equal opportunities for everyone, regardless of which universities they've attended, from where they're coming. You know, Philip should have the same access to the opportunities that everybody else has, those other 25 people coming in. Thank you so much to everybody for joining today. We really appreciate your time and your thoughts. And this may become an inaugural event, so we can check in and see where we are and how we're moving along with all this work. So thank you very much for joining us. We honour your time. And if there's no final questions, that's it for today.
Thank you for having us.
It's a pleasure.
Okay.